Channel 79, we'll go ahead and get started with this regular meeting of the Darien Board of Finance for Tuesday, October 19th, 2021. Thanks everyone for being here tonight. We will start off as we normally do with an invitation for public comment. Seeing no one from the public to comment, unless you gentlemen wanted to comment, you'll have your turn. We'll move on to the review and closeout for the reserve and capital non-recurring expenses. Jennifer.
So when we met last month, we did not have the information from DPW and DFD, so that's what's before you now. Total closeouts, $163,541. That's on page 2 under projects to close out. We're closing out replacing compressor tools. The big one we're closing out is the town hall renovation reserve. One note with that is there's $4,942 currently encumbered related to town hall heating upgrades, but we can eliminate that with the transfer that's next on your agenda. So we'll be able to close out $144,000 from that, and then the tree replacement program. On page 3, these are projects to remain active because they're ongoing. The one that I do want to call your attention to is paving, towards the middle of the page. Right now there's $20,307 in there, and this was one that has been funded year after year. We let the project roll. There was discussion about just making it kind of a one and done type of thing, but in discussion with Ed, that really doesn't work because of the nature of a paving project. So what he's asking is that every year he'll use as much as he can, but he does keep some because then during the paving season, there can be issues with timing and price and escalation. So my recommendation would be that we monitor this balance every year, but I think we should make it available to Ed to use as he needs. If we see it creeping up, I think then we can have a conversation with Ed about that. The next page, there's 2 reserves that we would have normally closed, but due to COVID delays, we're still waiting on parts and pieces for things. So we're asking to keep those open. And then the final page, page 5 of the report, is a listing of idle projects. They do total $242,000, but we've provided some status information that lets you know that there are plans for these dollars. They are on hold, but going to be used in the near term. The traffic signal replacement, that's going to be our contribution for the Palmer's signal upgrade project. The bridge repairs, we have a consultant coming out in the next couple of months to take a look at the bridges. Town hall carpet replacement, we needed to finish the cameras and HVAC upgrades first, then we can do painting, then we can do the carpet. And then the town hall gym upgrades, that was funded over several years, and it was, because it was phased in funding, it's taking a while to get up and running because we didn't have all the money we needed to get started.
What does bringing in consultant to look at bridges due to scour issues mean?
I looked this up in case Ed wasn't here, and I believe it's when the dirt around the footing of the bridge starts to wash away.
Okay.
I pictured more like SOS, but I was wrong.
I was wrong. Glad you looked it up in anticipation of my question. Well, she knows I'm going to ask. All right. So this is just in addition to what we closed out last month.
Right. So if we close these out, the balance in your reserve will be $280,000, and then we'll also be putting in the Board of Ed $84,000 insurance money once that works its way through the appropriation process.
Okay, terrific.
And Jen, was there a closeout for another Board of Ed project?
No, we took care of all of theirs last month.
Was that last month?
Yep.
Okay. So that's already in the 116.
Right.
And are we missing any information for any other accounts, or is this it?
This is it.
Okay. All right. I didn't have any other questions. Anybody else have any questions on this? Okay. Motion to approve. Dan, second. Paul, all in favor? Okay, great. Okay, very good. Okay, transfers, Public Works, Jennifer. Go ahead, please.
Good evening. Ed Gentile, Director of Public Works for the town of Darien. Here tonight with Anthony Campanella, our Facilities Supervisor, if you folks don't know him. We're here to ask for a transfer request for funding to complete our HVAC work here at Town Hall. Over the past couple of years, the DPW has upgraded the air conditioning, and that is completed now, 100%. We are about 90% complete on the HVAC work. As you see in our description of the reason we're asking for the transfer, we had provided drawings and mapping for the building to the consultant and contractor. Throughout the process of, this building and over time, they've added valves, they added actuators and motors. We found them as we were opening up walls and ceilings to look at certain areas. We'd open up a wall expecting to find one valve, we found 2 or 3. They split the system into different areas to feed different rooms. They made different rooms, putting walls up and closing off doors. So this caused us to go back and address a change order. We got the estimate from Automated Logic to do this work. And also included is what Jen had mentioned, over the $4,900 that was included in the Town Hall reserve account, and she added that into the transfer also so that you can close out that Town Hall reserve. I'm here to answer any questions that you may have. We're waiting to turn the contractor loose. He's ready to go and finish this. But I told him he did have to wait to start doing this work until we had the transfer in place.
Do you feel like this covers everything, or is there anything else lurking out there that could be unknown?
The only thing that I could, not unknown, but the only thing I'd like to do maybe next year and maybe put it in the capital budget to come around is a balancing of the system in this building. It's not bad from what they tell me, but once we get the heat going, we try it through the winter and we get back into the spring and summer and turn the AC back on again, I'd like to have them come out and just check it and make sure everything's done correctly. That's probably going to be around 10 grand, but that'll be in my capital request come December.
Okay. Questions for Ed or Anthony?
I just don't quite get the 4942, which showed up in the earlier pages.
So Ed had a change order for the project, 4942, and he wanted to keep going with the project, so he encumbered those funds against the town hall reserve, and it was a minimal amount of money, so we thought, yeah, run with it. But now with the second piece, we're thinking, let's just move them all in one place, then we have the whole project accounted for in one spot.
Okay, I had no trouble with it. I'm just trying to understand the accounting. Okay.
Well, but basically what you did is instead of closing out the 144, you closed out 139 and put this balance in there against this expense?
Opposite. Instead of closing out 139, we're closing out 144 because we moved the 49.
Okay, I'm sorry. Yeah, okay. That makes sense. Other questions for Ed or Jen?
And Jen, when we do that, we're still going to track the 25 that comes out. It'll still track within the overall project, right?
Right, that's why we're moving it into this account. The 2 account number is where we budgeted the original 170.
Got it.
So it'll all be one spot.
Good deal. Other questions? All right, motion to approve. Jim, second. Rob, all in favor? Okay, great. All right, thank you, Ed. I appreciate it.
Gentlemen, as always, thank you very much for your support. Appreciate
Absolutely.
it. Thanks.
Okay, next up, review of pension and OPEB funds. Mr. Hendrickson.
Well, I hope everything made it through the internet to your sites, but this is an abbreviated copy.
Just for the viewers, while we're waiting for these to be passed around, we asked a few meetings ago if Paul at this meeting could provide an overview of some of the work that he is undertaking with as the Board of Finance rep on the town and police pension boards, which is a pretty important position. And so the purpose of this meeting is to get an update on where we stand on a variety of measures and metrics for those important boards and the funds that they manage. And so, Paul, we appreciate your help with all this.
Yeah. And the pension board meets every quarter. There are 2 pension boards, the police pension board and the town pension board. I'm a member of both. The board is independent of any other board. It has a fiduciary responsibility to maintain funds in a reasonable state. And I'll just start on the presentation. And on the page 2 lists the members of the board. There are 5 members of each board. I'm the only member who's on both boards. The fund manager is Boston Partners, founded in 1995. It has 5 offices in the United States, well, 4 in the United States and 1 in England. And it's a value-oriented investment strategy, and most of their principals have at least 10 years of experience. They have industry expertise plus quantitative and qualitative type experts in various fields. They manage 4 funds for Darien, totaling $177.1 million. The town of Darien and police pension funds, and the town of Darien and police other post-employment benefit trusts. That was recently started, I want to say 5 or 6 years ago. We've had a relationship with Boston Partners since February of '05. And a comparison of the pension fund. The Darien Employees Fund is a little over $100 million. The town police is $61 million. And basically, all 4 funds and or trusts are roughly 60% equity, 40% fixed income. So their performance pretty much mirror each other. Portfolio of the OPEB trust is relatively small, 5 million for employees and 6.5 for town police. Next page is the number of securities. They normally compare themselves to the Russell 3000 value or the S&P 500. Lists the number of securities, the average market cap, the dividend yield, and then the turnover. They hold basically for the longer term, typical value type of investor. So they only turn over their portfolio about every 5 years.
What's the time period covered by this page?
Excuse me?
What's the time period covered by this page? Is this last year or what?
This
Since
was
inception.
this is as of the October meeting, so it would be
A
the
year
turnover.
to date.
I would have to get back to you on that.
That's fine.
Okay. The next page is the portfolio statistics. They hold 146 equities. 10 largest holdings make up just shy of 20% of portfolio. Largest holding is J&J, less than 3%. The current investments include all 11 S&P sectors except utilities and energy. The largest sector holdings are in financials, healthcare, and industrials, and combined roughly 60% of the portfolio. Yes.
Is that by the exception of utilities and energy, is that by policy they don't invest in
No,
carbon, or is it just
it was,
fossil fuels?
no, it was by policy. I think it was by, they thought they were too highly valued at the time, and it exceeded what they thought was a reasonable benchmark at which to purchase any. They had utilities and energy, and they've divested of those.
What's the weighted average market cap? I'm not sure I understand. Yeah,
If you take the market cap of all of them, add them up together, divide by the number of securities, that would be the weighted average market cap.
but J&J is like 3%. J&J must be 200 times or something, this number, right?
That's in millions. Well, the report is in one of the attachments I sent you. We can look at that. Okay, and then,
J&J's market cap is 420 billion.
Billion, right.
Yeah.
That would blow this average.
Well, that's 170 billion, right?
that's 170 billion.
Or whatever.
That
So
would-
is this the weighted average market capitalization of the securities in that portfolio? So if you compare that to the S&P 500, that means that the weighted average, that would suggest that the market cap of the stocks that make up the 146 are a lot smaller than the companies that make up the 505 in the S&P 500. Is that your read of that, Jim?
That's kind of my question.
Yeah. Is that your read of that, Jim?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
And
Yeah, I'm not sure what it means either, but if I had to guess, that seems like
Yeah.
what it would be. In any case, please, go ahead.
Yeah.
Maybe what it is within the portfolio. In other words, 146 issues, right, securities? And, total of 93 million, that could well, I don't know. That comes close.
I'll get an explanation for you, but it really
Okay.
isn't germane.
Okay, keep going.
The next page is performance. Performance, in both gross and net of fees over 1 year, 5 year, 10-year, and since inception. And the benchmark they used is the Russell 300 value versus, and 50% of Bloomberg Barclays, or 50% of S&P and 50% of Bloomberg Barclays. And so we've done reasonably well. But the proof of the pudding is we are essentially 100% funded. So it isn't how much money you make, it's matching assets and liabilities. The actuarial assumptions are on the next page. The inflation assumption was reduced from 3% to 2.75% for both funds. On July 1st of 17, the salary increase is 3.5%, which I haven't seen lately, for town employees, and the police are graded on their service. The rate of return reduced on July 1st of 19 from 6.5 to actually 3.75%, rounded to 3.8%.
Paul, how often do they revisit the assumed rate of return? And is that based on sort of an overall market trend, or is that based on our actual pensions performance?
Well, the actuarial evaluation is done every 2 years, full valuation. We're due for one right now. Have they started it, or?
Yeah, it's in the works.
Okay, so they start that and they examine all their variables, which include mortality tables and rate of return and obviously salary and inflation rates, and then would make recommendations to the board, and it's up to the board to approve.
Paul, I think people don't have a document. I think you said 3.8, 3.75. I think you meant to say 6.38
Yeah.
and
Sorry.
6.375. Right?
Yeah,
Something.
sorry.
Thank you.
Now, right before I left the boards and Paul replaced me, we did a pretty thorough study of those actuarial assumptions, and the actuaries came in and led that effort. And to his point, it's not just the assumed rate of returns, it's mortality, morbidity, marriage rates. I don't know, there were, how many, Jennifer? There must have been a dozen or more of those statistics that they did. And we lowered the assumed rate of return, which is an important figure only in the sense that it helps you determine what your contributions are going to be, right? So if your assumed rate of return is really high, right, that's been the controversial thing about a lot of state pensions these days. Some of them had, I don't know how many are left like this, but there were some that had assumed rates of return that were 8.5%. When you have an assumed return like that, you don't have to make as many contributions because you're assuming that what contributions you do make are going to have fabulous returns. And so what they should have done, and what we started to do, was to begin to lower that rate of return, that assumed rate of return. So when you do that, it does increase the amount that you have to contribute into the pension plans to make them, quote, fully funded or reasonably and fairly funded. That you have to be kind of careful with that, because it does create budgetary stress to lower that assumed rate of return. So my personal view is that something in the zip code of what they have right now is much closer to, quote, the truth in terms of long-range returns for these types of assets. And of course, if you look back at all that, it would suggest that this is not too far off the mark in terms of something that's conservative and reasonable. But all of those actuarial assumptions need to be revisited on some reasonable basis.
And actuarially, they take losses and gains and amortize that over 5 years to have a smoothing effect, so you don't have oscillations.
Right.
So when we look at the 6.38% assumptions, is that solely the return on the investments, or does that incorporate withdrawals from the fund, or does it and other variables, or is that just what you're assuming is happening to your net investments?
That's the net investments.
Okay.
And that's a nominal rate of return. In other words, it's not a.
No, that's
inflation
nominal.
adjusted.
That's
It's
nominal.
nominal. And that's used to discount to get your, as John indicated, your liability. As your rate decreases, your liability increases. And in our CAFR, there's a sensitivity study of how much it would increase if you decreased it by 1 point, or how much better it would, how much less it would be if you increased it by 1 point.
And is that rate of return mandated by the state or recommended by the Municipalities Association?
And neither, it's done by the board,
by
because
the board.
each plan is specific to a town. I sent everyone this study by Hooker and Holcomb, which is one of the primary actuarial firms in the state. It has a very detailed study of what pension plans are targeting and what they're returning, and also by size of fund, and also it gives a comprehensive breakdown. Here, I'll share. You can pass that around.
How does the inflation play in? Is that assumed to be baked into the salaries, the cost of the? I guess, how does the inflation play into the?
Not an actuary. I really don't know.
So, Jennifer, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but all of these statistics are actually layered into the cost base that is built into the forecast of how much you're going to have to spend on these pensions over a long period of time. And so it's not just the actuarial rate of return, the 6.38%, but there is built into that an inflation assumption and sort of salary growth assumption with tenure and all of that is built into a fairly complex formula that will forecast on a nominal basis what all this is supposed to be, right? And then you discount that back on a present value basis, and that's your, quote, funding bogey that you have to have in place to meet those future requirements. Now, according to
Plus your mortality rates, if that changes. too.
yeah, and that's another thing, is that you have things like mortality built in, so you're predicting how long somebody is going to live and actually collect pension payments, that sort of thing. And so all that is built into a fairly complex model that our actuaries supply to us. And from that, a recommended contribution to support the pensions is made to Jennifer every year, right? So as a town, we're faced with a decision of here's what the actuaries recommend to contribute to each of those funds to keep them funded, to protect the interests of those future retirees. And at least since I've been on the board, I don't know that we've ever not funded that recommended contribution. So that's like one of the important things for this board to do is to meet those obligations. Have I left anything out, Jennifer?
No, I think you covered it all.
Okay.
So when we were going through the budget process and we were hearing about higher contributions because of a lowered
Right, rate of
expected
return.
rate of return, that was determined or mandated by the pension board,
Correct.
not any
Correct.
third party other than.
That is correct.
Yeah, the big one we had was when I was still on that board and we had that major review, and I think we lowered it a point or a point and a half, a lot. The assumed rate of return was lowered by a lot. There were some other complicating factors, but that's definitely driven some pension contribution increases in the last few years.
That's an abbreviated one, that's an interim report, but it gives you some idea of the calculations involved. And
Jennifer, the pension payments, are they inflation adjusted?
No, we do not have any cost of living adjustments. No automatic cost of living adjustments. There are provisions for it to be reviewed, and in recent history, it has not been granted.
Okay, Paul, go ahead.
okay, and I'm on the actuarial facts page. Contributions, employees on the town plan contribute 5% of their salary. Police contribute 6% of their salary. The town has made their actuarial determined contributions, or ADCs, each year. For the past decade, they've been met or exceeded. And as I said before, the asset, that is market gains or losses, are recognized over a 5-year period, and it's equal amortization of by 20% each year. And there's an amortization table in the actuarial reports, and I believe also in the CAFR. And the pension funds for 6 of the past 7 years have exceeded 100% funding. And the actuarial determined contribution takes into account the normal cost, which is the funds fund the benefits at the start of the year, any past service costs to reduce any unfunded surplus or liability, then any interest between the actuarial year and the start of the fiscal year. And lastly, I want to touch on teacher pensions. Although we have nothing really to do with teacher pensions, their retirement is based on 2% per year of service times the number of years times the average of their 3 highest salary years. The maximum percentage they can get, however, is 75%. Contributions to the Teachers Retirement Board, or TRB, was 6%, effective in '92. In 2018, that was up to 7% of their salary. The state is responsible for contributing sufficient funds to make the plan viable. This is one of the things that has caused the local versus state control argument. They're trying to push down part or all of the pensions down to us. Teachers do not pay FICA. They do not collect Social Security based on a teacher's salary. Pension, as I indicated before, is the sole responsibility of the state. Our proportion of liability is $190 million right now, but the state is reportedly adding $1.5 billion to state pensions, given all the federal funding and surplus is up in Hartford, but the allocation is unknown. And I found out that Board of Ed non-certified employees, i.e. those working 20 hours or more, are participants in the town pension plan.
Well, I just have one question about, like, when we look at the contributions that we need to make,
Yes.
I think we have some employee groups on the town side, right, that have just moved to a defined contribution plan.
New hires,
New hires.
yes,
So
in one of the bargaining units.
will the actuaries begin to kind of take that into effect and look at the fact, because I think for some period of time, we'll have, when new employees come on, we'll have less contributions coming in
Yes.
at the same
Oh,
time
they'll
when.
take a look at the whole thing, yes.
So I think, do we think that's, given the turnover, the relatively slow turnover on the town side, I mean, do we think that it would add any kind of material step up in the funding, just given that contributions would be lower and withdrawals, you would assume assume the same speed?
I'm not in a position to make any type of statement right now.
Wasn't it true that prior to this agreement, were any town employees contributing?
To a defined
Pension.
contribution, we have one group that telecommunicated within the bargaining unit for the town hall union. They have the choice to participate, and we do have one telecommunicator who participates in the defined contribution plan.
But wouldn't it be true that any group that starts to contribute is going to lower the town's required contribution? Maybe at a very small rate to begin with, but growing over
No,
time?
it does take time. Just like Jim said, you're gonna have lower employee contributions coming in. And because those new employees would have small liability because you don't invest for 5 years in a defined benefit plan, your payouts are gonna stay about the same as they were, but now you have fewer contributions coming in. So it takes a little time before the defined benefit starts benefiting us financially.
Yeah, I think that there's kind of two differences. One is the town's contribution, whether it be to defined benefit or whether it be to a defined contribution plan, which sort of matches that employee. And so when the first employee comes on to the contribution, the town's kind of matching into that pot, but not into the pension, which is what we need to fund. And if you assume the same percentage kind of continue to be supported by the pension, you just have a little bit less coming in and about the same coming out. And there's, if there's a significant movement from the defined benefit to defined contribution, I think you then see more.
Mm-hmm.
But I think we have very little turnover, I think, on that.
Right, it's in the Public Works Union, and they tend to have less turnover in that bargaining unit. So I don't think we'll see a great impact from it, but that information has been provided to the actuaries and will factor into the valuation.
And to the extent employees drop out early, before they get vested in the defined benefit plan, that actually subsidizes the contribution for them. Whereas in the defined contribution, there's no such process. Do any of the town employees, the non-teachers, they're all covered by Social Security, right?
Right, police are not, but the non-certified Board of Ed and all the regular town hall, non-sworn personnel are.
Thanks.
And all of the Board of Ed non-certified, non-teacher, non-administrator, they're part of the town.
Working 20 hours or more.
And the contributions to the contributions to the town pension come part out of the Board of Selectmen's budget for the town employees and part out of the Board of Ed budget for the non-certified.
Right, and there's also library employees who participate, and so there's a library contribution as well.
And does the town, just curious in terms of library contribution, do we make that directly out of the Board of Selectmen's budget, or is it part of the grant and then they make it? to the
It's
pension?
part of the grant, then we make the payment and just reduce what we send over to them.
And a couple things I would add is there is a town and police investment policy. So one thing to point out is that Boston Partners makes all the investment decisions. So the pension board and both pension boards will get a review and update from Boston Partners in terms of where they're investing the money, but the actual investment decisions in terms of which securities to buy and which bonds to invest in, those guys really do all of that, and that's what we've hired them to do. And you can see the performance that they've had on the page that Paul showed. The investment policy for those two boards is basically anywhere between 60% equities and 40% bonds, or 40% equities and 60% bonds. And over time, obviously the equities have outperformed the bonds, maybe on a risk-adjusted basis, but in any case, they've outperformed. And one of the debates that we'd had before is whether we should loosen that policy a bit to permit 70% equities or 80% equities. Ultimately, we decided not to, so I don't know where the pension boards are at this moment. I think Boston Partners, at least the time I was on, was always angling to see if they could get us to do some more equities than what we were permitting. And maybe that's a good idea, but something for them to consider. Have you guys thought about that, or that's been pretty static?
I read the policy, and the policy says Up to 60% for either
For
one.
either one,
Yeah.
right, so that was within that range. Importantly, the policy proscribes anything like alternative investments, which would include private equity funds, hedge funds, those types of things. Those are not permitted in the investment policy,
Not
so
not
the pension
appropriate.
assets are invested in really bread and butter stuff that anybody would understand, as opposed to some of this more exotic type investing, so.
That would include derivatives?
Correct, yeah, none of
Well-
that stuff.
The goal isn't to make a market killing. The goal is to match our liability.
Well, and stable and predictable
Yeah.
funding, so we had a debate a few years ago about whether they should be investing in IPOs, that sort of thing, because technically that's an equity and fell outside that policy, and they had made some money on one, but everybody was, even that raised some hackles in terms of whether that was a prudent investment to go. So it's a very conservative shop, and they've managed it conservatively for 1,000 years, so long time. Other questions, Jim?
Paul, on the last page on the teacher's pension, I think if I'm correct, Jen, just because we're going through the audit now, those numbers, even though we don't pay for the teacher's pensions, they do sort of flow through our financials and onto
Yes.
our balance sheet and so forth. So when you
Yes.
do review that and you see
They are
that
listed.
those contributions or or deemed liabilities made sort of on our behalf. And then, Paul, in terms of the allocation unknown, is it the question of like whether or not, how they would allocate it among the 159 different
I
employee pools, or?
I just saw an article, must have been a month ago, by the guru of pensions, Keith Fanoff or something. He's written numerous articles about it. He said $1.5 billion is coming, well, $1.5 billion has been dedicated to pensions. That, I do not recall whether that was teachers' pensions or state employee pensions, or it was trickled down to the municipalities for any of their pension obligations. I'll see if I can retrieve it tomorrow, and if I can find it, I'll send it to everyone.
Yeah, so Keith Fanoff is terrific. He is
Yeah,
a
he's on top.
government affairs reporter, I think, for the Connecticut Mirror. So if you don't read his stuff and want to be informed about government, highly recommended. I've been to a couple of his talks, and one of them, he talked about the specter of this shift in funding responsibility. The idea would be to take part of, for example, that $190 million for our portion of the state teacher liability. And the idea in state government, again, before they got all this recent federal funding, was that maybe the way for them to handle that would be to shift some of that liability directly to the municipalities. And the rationale for that was, look, we understand that the teachers are our responsibility, but maybe you've granted them pay increases and other things that we might not have done, and therefore it's fair, given kind of what you've decided to pay these teachers, to for you, the municipality, to assume a bit of that liability, not all of it, but a fair bit of it. And we'd estimated at the time, this has been a few years ago, that we could face something like $12 million worth of that liability, which would be dumped on our books, that we would be responsible for funding. So not a trivial thing, but so far there's been no movement directly in that regard. And to Paul's point, if they're going to get $1 billion, how much was it, $1.5 billion?
No, but
Again, we don't know whether it's state teachers or other state employees, but whatever that is, it takes the pressure off the state to try and do something radical like that. So
But to elaborate on the point, the state didn't fund teacher retirement properly for a long time.
Well, and that's the problem, is that they would hand us our share of that liability, and that liability is not fully funded, right? We'd have to make up that difference, so.
Or they funded it by issuing general obligation pension and benefit bonds.
There you go. Other questions for Paul? Frank?
The return numbers, those are across the equity and bond, those, right?
It's the total fund.
Yeah. Okay.
I sent you like 10 attachments, and one of them is results of our October pension meeting, and they have the results as of through September. You can go through there, and it's broken down, equity returns, bond returns, with their respective benchmarks. Then the fund is the total, and then say, a mixed benchmark between fixed income and equity to
Yeah.
take.
I ask just because the benchmarks look like they're total equity, but
Well, no, there's two
No,
different,
total.
they're split, right? So if you look at page,
No,
where was
And
it?
the detail shows that the equity-only performance is well in excess of the equity
Yeah.
benchmark,
Yeah.
right?
Well, so you're looking at the portfolio performance page? So what they did was they split basically a sort of bond index and a stock index.
Oh,
So you
yeah.
take 50/50 of those and you get those numbers. That's not quite right. Probably what they should do is take 60% of the Russell 300
Right.
and 40% of the bond index, just because that's the
The mix.
investment we've had. So this paints a little rosier picture than what it should be. My guess is that, the differences are, a couple hundred, 250 basis points, maybe 300, not like this. In any case, they, by whatever sort of mix you pick, they've clearly outperformed on even a net basis, so.
What I remember, not to belabor the point, but what I remember reading was the equity-only return in our portfolio was 40% or something. And that
I know it exceeded.
that well exceeded the
That's why we-
equity-only benchmark. That's on a year-to-date basis,
Yeah.
that might be unusual, but this year it seems like they performed exceedingly strong. And again, that was the October 13th pension meeting report.
Yep, they have done well. Other questions
Yeah.
for Paul?
40.
Yeah.
Okay, very helpful, Paul. I know it took some time to pull all this together and ship it
No,
around
all I
as
did
pre-reading,
is
so thank you.
click, add an attachment, add an attachment.
Well, even your clicking is appreciated, so.
No, just getting back to what Dan said, net of fees for the past year, the return on equity was 40.58%. The Russell 3000 was 36.64, and the S&P 500 was 30. So outperformed the S&P by 10 points and the Russell by 4 points.
Yeah, not
So,
bad.
Pretty good.
Really good if you can do it year after year. Okay, thank you for that. So next up, discussion and possible action on bond authorization for the new Norton Heights ladder truck. Jennifer?
I think it was at the July meeting when you transferred the $1.3 million for the ladder truck, that there was some discussion of having future discussion about possibly bonding this. So I'm bringing it to you now. It is eligible to be bonded. What you have in front of you for discussion is a bond resolution that would increase the amount by $5,000 to cover potential issuance costs. And just a couple of considerations for your discussion. In terms of timing, we expect to go to contract probably mid-December, and it's going to be going out to bid very soon. We need to have, if we're going to bond, we need to have an approved resolution, meaning all the way through the RTM, no later than 60 days after we enter into the purchase contract. So we do have time if we enter into the contract mid-December. There is time the RTM could approve it in January. We'd still be less than 60 days beyond entering into the contract. Another item to keep in mind is interest costs. I provided 2 estimated debt service schedules at 2%. If we had a 20-year term, interest would be about $275,000, a 10-year term, about $144,000. The useful life of the truck is 25 years. And then the last consideration that I wanted to put before you is if you did bond that, it would return the $1.3 million to your capital reserve, so it would be available to finance other capital projects.
Jim, you did some analysis and thinking about all this. Do you want to report on that?
Yeah, and I think I was one of the ones that sort of suggested that we look at and we consider having a resolution in place to possibly, if needed. And I think when I think through this, I really look at sort of the last point on the memo here is that I think before making any decision on whether or not to bond this, we've already taxed the money that's necessary to pay for this fire truck, and we have that sort of dedicated in a project fund. the way I think about sort of bonding is, not only to make sure it's on an eligible project, but I sort of look at what's our overall sort of capital costs that we have. What types of small capital requests do we have coming up in the budget, and what type of large capital costs requests do we have coming up? I think it would be, my recommendation would be to, and Jen, thank you for putting this together, but to kind of sit on this and wait to see what happens over the next couple of months as we begin to see the budget develop and see what the upcoming capital needs are in the fiscal 23 budget, including any other fire trucks. I think Jen, per the spreadsheet that we keep around, I think there's either 2 or 3 that are potentially included, so 3 trucks that could potentially come in fiscal year 2023. We haven't looked at that closely, but I would say we sort of wait to decide on whether or not we would want to move forward with bonding until we get a little bit more insight in terms of what the upcoming budget year looks like, and whether or not the capital we've reserved for this could be more efficiently used somewhere else, and think about bonding this. My general inclination is to, since we've already taxed for this, to pay cash for it, but I think it'd be healthy to wait and see what's coming up on the upcoming budget.
Jen, with respect to sequencing, right now, this resolution would precede entering into the contract.
It probably would not get approved by the RTM before entering into the contract.
Okay, fair. If we wait until December to approve this resolution, how do you think about that sequence? Is it material or is it immaterial?
It's immaterial, as long as we're no more than 60 days. Any kind of down payment that we have to give at the time that we enter into the contract, we'll be able to reimburse ourselves as long as we're within that 60-day period.
Thank you.
Jen, I don't remember from the last time we talked about this, but if we push ahead and do this contract by mid-December, when's the expected delivery date on this one?
They usually take a year to 18 months, I think.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
And they'll have progress payments throughout.
Thanks.
And Jen, in terms of overall bonding, is the thought that we'd still, somewhere in Q1, go to market for the second half or the next installment of the Oxford School?
Yeah, it'll be mostly Oxbridge. We have some other smaller items that we'll be cleaning up in there too.
Yeah, I think it sounds like the main reason for doing this is that, look, the funds are appropriated. And by the way, this is an appropriated reserve. We don't have to go to the RTM for this to release this funding, correct?
You already have released it.
That's great, okay. So to Jim's point, if we wait a little bit, there's a chance that we're going to save on issuance costs and other sort of friction associated with this, and let's just wait to see how the rest of this capital picture comes together in what, the next 90 days? Is that your time frame for this, Jim? Or something like that? Okay.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. Why don't we give this a little bit of time, let this settle a bit. They can move forward with this, knowing that the funding's in place, and we can figure out the bonding strategy a little bit later. That works for me. It's all right with you, Jennifer?
Absolutely.
Okay. Other questions? Okay, so nothing to vote on for that. Let's see, review the draft meeting calendar.
So for those of you that will be returning next month, I wanted to put this in front of you. I think we should wait to vote on it until we have our new members next month, just in case they have anything that jumps out at them. But I wanted to get it before you just so you can see what the normal schedule would look like. This is just based off of this year's calendar and avoiding any school breaks. But when you review it, if you see any dates that maybe are in conflict with something significant around town that I may have missed, let me know and we can put a revision for the vote in November.
Yeah, my only comment is we've cleaned this up a lot from the past in terms of extraneous meetings and 2 meetings the week that we do the final mill rate vote and kind of all that. So I think this reflects all that simplification, but I wish the next board good luck with that, but it looks fine to me. So.
And the virtual in August is just because people are out of...
Nope, that is because I used this year's calendar and I didn't update that.
Which why we need further scrutiny on this before I vote next month.
You're eventually gonna get pushed back on December date.
I don't think you'll get much complaints if the August meeting is virtual.
We usually do end up canceling.
Virtual from Hawaii, sold.
No, that'll be me in June.
All right.
Jen, have we, is this synced up with the Board of Selectmen's calendar in terms of certain budget meetings or so forth? And-
They have not set their budget schedule yet. They normally, and it is subject to change because there'd be a pretty, a lot of turnover on that board, but they typically do their budget review mid-February. So the one on the February 15th could be a conflict. But other than that, I don't expect that there would be any potential conflicts with their budget meetings.
One of the things I've tried to do in the past that I'd strongly recommend going forward is that once those meetings are finalized, not just for the Board of Education, or Board of Selectmen, but also the Board of Education for anything that's budget related, is to create a single master calendar that has their meetings and our meetings, so that you can look at it and not only get the sequencing right to make sure that's all in order, but that you can attend the meetings that those other boards are having. It makes our process a lot more efficient if you hear the source material as those budgets are finalized, so definitely would do that again. Okay, anything else on the calendar? Okay, financial report, Jennifer.
Everything is going very well. On page 1, property taxes, I just want to call attention that our actual collections are consistent with prior years. Tax collector actually said that through September, she was a little bit ahead of last year after even accounting for the deferrals and what was, all of them had come in mostly by that point. So she's very pleased with the way the year's going. Other revenues are doing well. We're still cranking along with town clerk. It seems to be slowing down a little bit in terms of the revenue numbers that are coming in, but from the number of transactions that we've been hearing about from assessor's office and town clerk, there's still a lot of activity. And then building permits, we still have the hold amount that we're waiting on redevelopment project permits. On the expenditure side in the general fund, things are tracking as expected. Last month we had a brief mention of the EMS, which is on page 3. We're waiting for a explanation from CMed about a significant increase. I did speak with them and we'll be getting just under $10,000 as a credit because they miscalculated on our invoice. On page 4, I want to call your attention to the tiered pilot. That was a new program or a new revenue from the state in the fiscal 22 budget. We have received those funds, so that is good. It was $66,000 that we had budgeted. And
Can you
then
explain that again? What is the difference with that and the pilot program?
it's a pilot program, so a payment in lieu of taxes, but they are tiering the reimbursement rate based on primarily, I believe, economic factors of the communities. So more distressed communities will have a higher reimbursement rate than those that are less distressed.
Okay.
So Jen, am I correct in reading that we originally assumed 10,000?
Mm-hmm.
They moved it into a system where it sounds like Darien would otherwise get less, and we actually got more?
Because I think they're either including additional types of properties in the pilot. I think they've expanded the program. And then they have also tiered it to have 3 different reimbursement rates. But overall, we're coming out about $55,000 ahead of what we expected in the budget.
Got it.
On page 5, I want to call your attention to the administrative capital reserve, the top row on the right. Kate and I just approved another transfer out of $5,000 for town hall security improvements. That's that camera and security project that Ed is doing. They had a need for an additional security door, so Kate and I have approved that. That leaves us $21,000 in that administrative reserve.
And could you remind our viewers just what the parameters are for that account and why we set that up.
So we started with $35,000. Kate and I have the authority to transfer out up to $15,000 with just approval by the two of us. And it's intended for items either taking advantage of opportunities that are time sensitive or moving forward on projects that are a little bit time sensitive. And anything over $15,000 would require the approval of Kate, myself, and the chair of the Board of Finance. And then I wanted to call your attention to pages 8, 9, and 10 are bond projects. What I have added in here, I've gotten estimates of estimated state grant reimbursements on some school projects, so I have added those in and reduced what our bonding would be, because we would bond that much less on these projects. We would not still bond the full amount plus the grant and then spend the grant. It would be a reduction in the amount that we bond by whatever state grant we receive. So that's on Oxridge Elementary, Holmes Roof, Hindley Roof, and Royal.
Is Royal in here?
Yes, it's on page 10. They've only spent $1,500 so far. So the Royal roof replacement isn't moving along very quickly yet.
Identification, it's a small amount, but what drove the transfers out to other funds? This is for the annual OPEB contribution made in July. We'll receive credit for the implicit subsidy in June. That's on page 2.
So that one stands out because our contribution to the capital fund normally comes out of that same section. And since we had no payment out to capital this year, the OPEB stands out. We have an ADC for the OPEB fund. This is the, not the police, but the Town and Board of Ed OPEB fund. It's usually on our side $8,000, $9,000. But then in June, we take money back out of the trust for the implicit subsidy because of retirees who are receiving benefits, and it's a blended rate, but really their insurance premiums are should be higher. It's an actuarial thing. But we get a credit back, so we end up with like a net cost on our side of about $4,000.
So you would always have this, it's just a timing issue as to
Yep.
when you get that?
We pay out the full amount in July, we get a credit back by roughly half in June.
Okay. Terrific. Any other questions for Jennifer on the financial report? Okay, approval of minutes. I had a chance to read through all these. Dan, thank you as always for taking a look, and I did not have any edits. Does anyone have any questions or edits for the minutes? This will be from our September 21st meeting. No? No? Okay, motion to approve. Paul, second. Frank, all in favor? Okay. Yes, minutes. Special assignments committee reports. Dan, anything on Ox Ridge?
Yes, 3 quick things. I've mentioned in earlier meetings that, well, in the last meeting, I'm sorry, there was a delay in the receipt of insulated roofing material because of a chemical that's used in that insulation. A decision was the team worked up 3 options. There was pretty much unanimous decision to go with one of the options that pushed back the scheduled completion of the academic wing to mid-June of '22 from mid-April. Think about that. Mid-June is after the year ends, and mid-April is right in the middle of a break. So it's actually a pretty elegant solution. Modest additional cost of $90,000 to $120,000. The rest of the project continues to move forward on time and under budget, even with that increase. Related, well, not unrelatedly, but we had delays from Eversource. The reason for this, well, excuse me, we had delays resulting from Eversource, which recall that there was a main power line that was kind of in the way of a lot of different conduits, and that caused some delays and some costs. But because of the environmental, energy efficient design elements of this building, we will be getting an $87,000 to $95,000 credit back from Eversource in the range of $87,000 to $95,000. So that will pay for some of the delay that original issue cost. And finally, we are now over 50% constructed on the academic wing as of a week ago or so. So
Terrific.
people are feeling pretty good about the progress. That's what I've got.
Yeah, it might be interesting in a future meeting to have a more formal presentation either by the committee itself or by you if you so choose. Just to see the puts and takes since we came up with the original budget. I know recently it was said that it's all kind of under budget and moving ahead, but it'd be interesting to see the original budget, what the nature of the change orders have been and how we've ended up where we are, just as an FYI for our board.
Sure, those documents are readily available, but I would suggest having Kip, who's led the entire effort extremely well,
Yep.
make that presentation.
Yeah, I think that'd be great. Okay, audit committee?
Yeah, so myself, Rob, and Taylor, are on our audit committee, and, they are, Jen, looks like they'll be finishing up in the next, few weeks, 3 to 4 weeks.
I think it may take a little bit longer than that. We found that now that there was CLA, there are some process changes that are just making things take a little bit longer.
Okay.
But we expect to file on time.
Okay. Well, I think one thing we wanted to bring up to the board tonight was, in connection with having the annual call with the auditors, and he interviewed me and discussing a lot of, how we go about, a lot of the financial controls that we have in place for creating reserves, monitoring what comes out of reserves, and so forth. We had a lot of discussions about what's best practices and if there are any things within Darien that we should be doing differently or think about improving to kind of always making sure we stay ahead of and are utilizing best practices. One of the things that came up, and Rob and Taylor and Jen and I, we all spoke about this, and it's a recommendation that we wanted to make to the whole board here, and if everyone was in agreement, it's a recommendation we could make to the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Ed, was that one of the areas they always sort of look at is fraud, and they always ask for questions about that. And one of the things that, in terms of understanding what best practices were, one of the things where we realized Darien could probably improve was in terms of, it's really threefold. It was one, recommending to the Board of Selectmen and I guess the Board of Ed as well, to make sure that in all the employee handbooks and manuals and so forth that, for the various employee groups, that there's a section in there that sort of deals with the sort of detection and reporting and prevention all related to fraud. And they thought that was, in terms of best practices, something that should be in all sort of employee manuals. And then the second thing was he recommended that, many other towns and so forth have some type of annual or biannual training that they provide for the relevant employees. Much like many of us have in the financial sector, it's a, it can be anything from a half hour to an hour online video that you would watch that just helps make sure our employee partners are always have the most up-to-date information on, what to look for, what the latest trends are and so forth, and ultimately how to protect against them. And then the third thing that he recommended, and I think we also agreed was a good idea, was many towns utilize a sort of fraud tip line. Whereas if an employee was to see something that they could, not only would the information be in the manual and would they have training, but they would also be having tip line that they could always call into. For smaller towns that with smaller employee bases, he said many times towns choose to sort of outsource that, where you can go to a third party, and that third party can kind of monitor the tip line, and when they collect it either through a traditional phone line or like a web portal that you would type into, they then kind of report it back to you, the Board of Selectmen, chair of the Board of Finance, Audit Committee, or some other individual that they've chosen. So those were, I think, 3 recommendations, and Rob, jump in here, that I think, when Rob, myself, and Taylor put our heads together and speaking with Jennifer, those were 3 recommendations we wanted to make to the Board of Selectmen to consider, to work with HR and so forth. And then also, as well to the Board of Ed.
And the incremental cost wouldn't be that much. We talked about training people, the tip hotlines out of a lot of money from stuff that I've seen in the past. Literally, it's $1,500 a month to run it. If you want to outsource it, which is probably the best practice. You don't want anybody kind of internal to do it. You want to give it to third party to do it.
And I guess maybe one thing I should have said at the outset is that, the consideration of these changes and so forth are not a reaction to anything that's been found, anything, any problems that the auditors had. This is just in terms of following best practices to make sure that, we're doing our job and we're giving our employees all the right, sort of training and tools that they need.
Are these long-standing recommendations? I mean, are these new recommendations, were they there last year, the year before?
Yeah, I don't recall them recommending it. The nice thing about, I think it was a new partner on there, right? So
Yeah.
they come with a different point of view, a different lens, right? This person just came in and just kind of immediately focused on it. I think there's a bunch of best practices that they kind of go down a checklist almost, Frank, right? And I think most of them are there, and they kind of got to this one and said, what do you guys think of this? My history has always been, this is almost like a 101 type of thing you put in place, right? You want people to be comfortable getting training A, and then B, if they see something, it's the classics, if they see something, say something, right? But you want to give them an anonymous place to call or go on the web portal. Yeah, so I think that new partner just kind of pointed it out for us, and I think we should take advantage of it.
And I think a lot of our discussions over the last couple of years that we've been on it, when we are talking with the auditor and discussing different things, it's, our general response has always been, so what is the best practices? What are other towns doing?
Yeah.
Just to make sure that we sort of stay ahead of it. So again, this is not a reaction to anything. This is more so just, making sure that sort of Darien stays on top of, all the best practices.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, any of these types of measures are not just good practice, but if there ever is a problem in the future, God forbid that we would have such a thing, one of the things that investigators will look at and try to determine is, did the town do everything that a reasonable person would do to prevent this sort of thing? And the list of things that is, quote, reasonable can grow and expand over time as technology and circumstances change. So it's, I think, a very good idea to put in place measures like these. To Rob's point, they're not egregiously expensive. They're consistent with best practice, and should a problem ever come up in the future, we'll be able to represent that we weren't shirking our responsibilities in terms of implementing those kinds of practices meant to train people in avoiding this kind of problem, but also in detecting and reporting the problems when they see them. So I think that's a good idea.
And I'm not sure if this is going to be the case, but sometimes insurance companies look at that. They have these measures in place when they're kind of evaluating it overall. And sometimes if you have things in place, I've definitely seen on like the cybersecurity side, they'll tend to, I don't know if I want to say lower the premium, but it makes it a little more easy to put your point across of why you need coverage.
Well, it's like having an alarm system at your house.
Right.
You normally would get a lower premium for your, at least your theft. And to your point on the call-in service for hotline, I've installed it in 2 districts I've worked in, and it's pretty seamless and very nominal cost.
It is.
And it's a general recommendation. It's pointed at no one.
So I think if the board was in agreement, I would say we would kind of formally recommend to both Board of Selectmen and the Board of Ed that they work with, with their staff and so forth to just make sure we're following these best practices and implementing these, as appropriate.
We'll put the recommendation in writing. All right, good deal. Anything else? Okay, Chairman's report. Today, is Frank Huck's last day as a member of the Board of Finance, and I just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge his service over these many years. He was my vice chairman for quite some time, and I have to tell you, there is no better partner to have than Frank. There were so many times that, as someone who's retired, that he was available during the day, during the week to support the efforts of the Board of Finance, represent us at important meetings when I couldn't be there, and just to be a thought partner on so many different things, and coming at it from the angle of all his education and legal background. It's just invariable that there was a thoughtful comment, a helpful addition, or something that just made the Board of Finance's work better. And that's thanks to Frank Huck. And so I'm very appreciative of everything he's done over the years. He is a great friend, but more importantly, he is a great town citizen. Everybody should learn from the example that Frank Huck sets. Thank you, Frank.
I'll defer to Jim on.
I just want to add that the first time Frank Huck gave me advice was 36 years ago in a professional setting, and I hope...
that's fraudulent, Dan. Don't do that.
I hope the advice I get from Frank and we get from Frank is never ending.
There you go. Here. So today is my last day on the Board of Finance as both a member and as chairman of this board, and I wanted to just take a few minutes to reflect on that. George Bush was still in the White House when I came on this board, and I was actually appointed.
Which George?
It seems like George Washington every once in a while, but I will tell you, it was George W. And I was appointed by the RTC to fill the seat of Peter Hovell, who was chairman at that time, and this was in 2008. And he and his wife had decided to retire down to Arizona, and Joey Reiner Gallo and Harry Artinian were running the RTC at that time, and I'd been vetted as a candidate for a housing board. And when Peter resigned, I'd been the only person they had on their radar scope for sort of any position, and they called and said, "Would you like to be on the Board of Finance?" And I said, "Sure. What does that board do?" Anyway, I learned what that meant over the ensuing years. So when I came on, Murray Stegelman had just become chairman, and he was chairman for 2 years, and then Liz Mao was chairman for 5 years, and then I took over for Liz, and have been in this spot for 6 years now. It's been quite the journey. There's been a lot that this board has accomplished, certainly over my full tenure, but over the past 6 years during my time as chairman, I think we've made a lot of important progress, mainly on trying to streamline, make things a little bit more simple, but also in terms of collaboration and outreach. I think the efforts sort of downstream to the RTM and FMB to try and bring them into our process, as well as being part of the discussions as other boards have worked through their budgets, have simplified our work and has allowed us to focus more on what our areas of responsibility are, as opposed to being redundant with some things that we've done in the past. And so I would applaud everyone here, both current members and members who've served during my time, for all the work to try to do that. One of the great things about these government boards is there's always something new and something different and something else to tackle, so the work's not done. It's ongoing, and the ongoing nature is permanent. And so there's plenty for the next board and boards after that to focus on. I would thank a few people. One of them would be Jamie Stevenson. She is not just a great town servant, but somebody who's got so much insight about sort of how town government works, advice on tricky situations where judgment's required, sort of when to do and when not to do. Every time I talk to her, I've learned something new, right? Just in terms of how you might think about something. That plus the fact that she's got so much information and perspective about how the town works. She's just been terrific in that role. I think we'll all miss her as she steps off the stage, but she's been a great friend and mentor to me. In addition to Frank, I'd like to thank Jim. He's really stepped up in this past year. It's up to the next board to decide who its next chairman is, but I know who I would recommend, and I think it's Jim. He's a tremendously hard worker. He's got great insight about many aspects of the Board of Finance through his professional work, and I think has been a simply tremendous individual and a great addition to this board. And I think you all will be well served to have him as your next chairman. I'd also like to thank Kate Bush. Kate was the director of finance when I joined this board 1,000 years ago, And I always thought for a long time, my God, if Kate ever leaves, I just don't know what we're going to do. Wouldn't that just be the most awful? That Kate is simply irreplaceable. And I still believe that Kate Bush is just an amazing individual. I think the world of her, and I was so excited when she was promoted to town administrator. I just didn't think she was ever going to be replaced until we met Jen Charneski, who is an absolute star. I think I could speak for everyone on this board with absolute unanimity that she has been simply an amazing part of this board, without whom we could not function at anywhere near the level of efficiency that we function at. And she is absolutely tremendous in every way. I count her as not just a colleague to this board, but as a friend and someone I hope to stay in close touch with. But Jennifer, thank you. A round of applause, please. I guess I would say further to that, someone once said that, this is such a thankless job. You get into a job like this and you've been on this board for 13 years, total compensation for 13 years of government service, 0. How thankless that must be. And that's actually not true. I get a lot of thanks. I get, especially during these recent months during the campaign, but also generally. I don't know if it's the same for all of you, but people do come up and thank you for this type of work. And I say that just because I would say to anybody in the public who's considering public service and whether they might get involved, it is in fact not thankless. The great thing about Darien is that you can do something like this and town citizens will come up to you and give their appreciation for the time that you spend doing this. And so there are days when you're fiddling with something at midnight, 1 o'clock, because you got to figure out something for some meeting or trying to do some memo or some communication. And there are times when you think, Jesus, it's really worth it. But remember that the great thing about this town is how everybody kind of comes in and does their little part. And so I'd encourage anyone who's considering government service, it is a ton of work, and no, you're not going to get paid much money, if any. But it's one of the important, I think, features of this town and why this town works so well is because people do step up to volunteer and try to make this a better place for everybody. And so I, in a way, not thankless. People have thanked me, and I'm sure thanked everybody here, and frankly, I'm thankful to have had the job myself. So that's an important thing. I guess in closing, I would say that the Board of Finance represents the taxpayers. Board of Selectmen, they make their own decisions about the policies where they want to take that board, the same with the Board of Education. But when they start spending money, they all got to come to this board, and this board represents the taxpayers. Our job is to make sure that the decisions they've made are prudent ones and consistent with financial best practice as well as wise expenditures of money. And then our job is to make sure that it's financed and paid for in the right way, whether it's through taxpayer funds or through bonding or through anything else. And then to convince the RTM that was the right decision. And I think that this board has been true to that mission for the 13 years I've been here, and I would hope that in the future stays true to that mission and stays focused on that particular aspect of what we do. It's an important, I would argue, critical role in this town, and I think we've played it well, and I would encourage all future boards of finance to keep that firmly in mind and make sure that that mission is adhered to. So that's all I have to say, other than just thank you to the members of this board, to the town staff, for everybody for putting up with me for all these years. It has been a privilege, so thank you.
Are we on other business?
We are on other business.
Well, hopefully you have 2/3 of the board that would support me in this, but I'd like to make a motion to formally thank and recognize John Zgrowski and Frank Huck for all the work that they've done, for the Board of Finance and for the town over their 10 years on this committee. Is there a second?
Second, third,
Second.
fifth, fourth.
So I guess discussion is the next point. One thing I would like to say and thank both of you for is, you guys have both done tremendous work. John as chair, you've led us through a lot of sort of difficult times and decisions and complicated budgets and so forth. And personally, I think you've spent a lot of time with me and kind of given me a lot of your energy, and I've tried to suck out everything I could that was between you 2 ears to kind of understand this better. And I would say, Frank, whether it was the countless, employee negotiating committees that you sat on, for I think you're still on the shared services committee. And I know every time, because I see the emails that John or I can't make a meeting or something, you're always there, and it's, sure, when's the meeting? So you guys have both been amazing, and I think that one of the most important things that you have both done together is, I feel like, lead this board to kind of stay focused on our work. And you've both, I think, set a tone that have made the seven of us, I think, work together. And I'm just gonna say, I think better than any other board in this town, and is about as efficiently as you can get seven people, all with different sort of opinions and backgrounds and so forth, to work together. So I think the two of you have done a miraculous job there, and I think it's sort of ingrained in this board, and I think as the four plus Taylor and our two new colleagues that have come on, I hope we can kind of continue what you guys, the sort of tone that you guys have set.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that very much.
Any other discussion?
Well, I would echo that as a new member to this board, not 2 years ago, I guess now, but I always thought the politics part would be the fun part and the serving part would be the tedious part, and I found it to be the exact opposite. And I'm not sure that's true in other parts of government in town or anywhere else, but I know that that's true here, and that is in a large measure to the leadership that we have been fortunate to serve under. So thank you both for your service.
I'd just like to say, as one of the longer serving members on the board, since interrupted terms, I started in 1997 when Mr. Covert was in charge. And back then I called it Ted and Six Dwarfs. Fortunately, the board has evolved in that we are all equals and contributors, and politics are in the rearview mirror, and we're all working for the town good. I describe the board as professional, cordial, and working together. And I think that's the best part of this board. And it's grown in professionalism, and also diversity in the Darien sense. In one time, I think the board was composed of 7 professional women, which I think is remarkable, since when I first ran for the board, Mary Jenko prompted me to run for the board, and she asked, "What do you see?" And I said, "Old white men." And so the professionalism has developed, and I look forward to working with the 2 members. I'm sad to see the 2 of you go, but I appreciate the wisdom and the guidance you have given this board over your years of service.
Thank you, Paul. That's great.
I guess I'll wrap it up by saying, so I'm finishing my 3rd year. And when somebody asked me to run, the thing that struck me, and it's still true today, is two words. I was very much bipartisan and very much professional. I think Paul hit it right on the head. It's kind of an honor sitting with this group that just kind of gets their work done, right? In a very, what do I want to say? They put the time in, they do the calculations we have to do, obviously, as kind of this finance board. And it's a real pleasure and honor to serve with you 2 gentlemen.
Thank you very much. That's great. Okay, then. Well, without...
All in favor?
Aye.
Well, I'll even vote for that resolution.
Unanimous.
Unanimous. All right, well, without further ado, again, thank you to everyone for this. And as I said at my State of the Town last year, renewal is good. And renewal for this board will be good and probably even better, you'll see. So Godspeed. Motion to adjourn. Rob, second. Frank. All in favor? We stand adjourned. Thank you, friends.